The wind came early that morning, colder than usual, as if the mountains themselves knew something was about to begin. Something ancient, something buried in silence and fear. Alina stood at the edge of the valley, watching the mist roll down into the lowlands like ghosts released from the past. Her backpack hung heavily on her shoulders, though it carried almost nothing: a map, a small packet of rice, a silver key, and a folded letter she was told never to open unless she failed, which she would not, or at least she told herself she would not, even though failure felt like a shadow that had walked beside her since the day her brother vanished under similar orders from the same group of men in the same quiet room lined with candlelight and cracked photographs of long-dead rebels. Her breath came slow and steady as she stepped onto the dirt path leading away from the only place she had called home. Her footsteps muffled by the damp ground, each one pulling her further from the crooked wooden house where her grandmother still sat by the stove boiling herbs and whispering to the walls the old woman had known Alina would leave today, just as she had known the crops would fail that year and the flood would take the southern field. She knew things the way the earth knew when to crack open and when to stay still, and when she looked at Alina with those clouded eyes and pressed the letter into her hand, she did not say goodbye, only nodded as if it had already happened. The road, twisted down through fields now empty, except for the bones of what had once been corn and barley scarecrows leaning sideways, their heads missing or burned. The war had not come in tanks and fire. It had come in silence and starvation, in men with smiles who spoke of progress and peace while building walls and dividing families like wheat from chaff. Alina had grown up learning to read from a smuggled textbook hidden in a floorboard and learning to run from voices that sounded too official. She had never been out of the valley, but she knew the world beyond it was not made for people like her. Still, she walked her boots worn at the toes, her hands jammed into her coat sleeves to hide the bruises left by the last training session, which they called preparation, but felt more like punishment. The mountains watched her go, their peaks wrapped in clouds, their silence heavier than stone, and somewhere beyond them, beyond the radio towers and rusted fences and broken cities, was her target. She only knew it by code X-42. A facility buried under layers of false names and denials, and if she reached it alive, if she completed what they had asked her to do, they promised everything would change, though they did not say how or for who midway. Down the slope a noise stopped her, a flutter sharp and sudden in the trees ahead. Not the wind, something else. She crouched low, her fingers brushing the handle of the blade tucked in her boot. She waited, heart pounding, until the sound came again, softer, now retreating not toward her but away, and she knew instantly it was a signal. 3 taps, a pause. 2 taps, a pause. 1 tap. The old rebel code they were watching. She had not even made it past the border trees, and already they were tracking her. She rose without hesitation, keeping to the left side of the path where the earth was firmer and the shadows deeper. She could not afford to be followed. Not this early. She still had 2 checkpoints to cross before she reached the abandoned railway. That would take her underground, and under surveillance. She moved faster now, legs burning as she climbed a ridge, only to drop into a narrow ravine where water trickled beneath the stones, and a rusted bicycle frame lay half buried in the mud. Memory came uninvited, her brother riding ahead of her down this same trail years ago, laughing, calling back to her to keep up his voice, filled with a joy that had vanished the day the trucks came and he was taken for questioning. They said he would be back in 3 days. He never returned, and no one ever spoke of him again. But she had found his journal buried in the loft above the barn, and in it were names, codes, maps, and the same insignia now burned into the corner of the letter she carried. Hawk cried overhead, and she froze again, not because of the bird, but because of the sound behind it. Faint but unmistakable. A low mechanical hum, too steady to be wind and too out of place to be. Coincidence? It was a drone, old model scout class barely. Audible but deadly if it spotted her. She ducked beneath a thicket of thorn branches, wincing as they scraped her face and waited. Breath shallow, counting the seconds as it passed over her unseen and uncaring. When it was gone, she crawled forward, through the underbrush, emerging onto a side trail that led toward the first checkpoint, a place marked only by a half-collapsed stone arch. Once the gate to a monastery, now a skeleton of history, she approached cautiously, noting the ash on the ground, and the faint smell of fuel someone had passed through recently, not hours ago, but minutes, and not alone. Boot prints in the mud suggested at least 3 people, 2 heavy, 1 light, all heading west, but moving slower than her. She did not stop. She could not. The first checkpoint was a test, not of identity, but of intent. Anyone could walk past the stone arch, but only someone who knew where the listening post was hidden would survive the next mile. She found it easily, a small hollow in a tree. Stump covered with moss. Inside, a device blinked red, then green, and she spoke the phrase they had drilled into her so many times she could recite it in her sleep. The wind forgets, but the mountain remembers. The device clicked, and a second light came on blue this time, signaling clearance. She kept moving her body, aching her mind, running ahead to the second checkpoint where she would have to lie in 3 languages and pass herself off as a migrant, fleeing border violence. Her ID was flawless, but her accent could betray her if the guard was local and not one of theirs. She reached into her coat and touched the silver key again. Not for luck, but for the reminder it offered that this was not just about getting in, but about what she would do once she was there, and what it would cost. The sky grew darker clouds, thick with the promise of snow, the kind that muffled sound and erased tracks, and gave just enough cover for plans like hers to unfold unnoticed. She welcomed it, even as her fingers grew numb. The trail ahead climbed sharply, now winding toward a ridge where signal towers blinked in the distance, thin lines against the sky. She would reach the safe house by nightfall if nothing slowed her, if no one caught her, if her mind held. But in her bones, she felt it. Something was already off, the pattern too neat, the silence too clean, like a trap waiting to spring, and somewhere ahead, perhaps even at the checkpoint itself, was a person she once knew, someone who had disappeared, like her brother, and returned with a different name, a different face, and a warning she had never been able to forget. And as she crested the ridge and saw the checkpoint lights flickering ahead, she knew without doubt this was where it would begin. Checkpoint looked harmless enough from a distance, just a slanted booth with chipped paint and a sagging wire gate, held together by rust and boredom. The guard inside leaned back in his chair, legs up on the counter, a cigarette barely burning between his lips. But Alina knew better than to trust appearances, especially now. Especially here. This post was not on any map, not officially. And the guard was not a man paid to wave people through. He was a filter, a blade disguised as a lock, and the only way past him was through a performance that had to be flawless. She adjusted her coat and kept her eyes low as she stepped into the clearing. Every movement calculated to match the identity she had been given. Her name was now Mila Guresh, born in the border town of Daran, fleeing from sectarian riots, trying to reach an uncle who no longer existed, with a story just close enough to reality that it might survive scrutiny, unless, of course, the guard decided to ask the wrong question in the wrong language and hear her heart falter in response. The guard looked up slowly, eyes sharp beneath the laziness posture still slouched, but fingers tightening just slightly on the edge of the table as if ready to move in a second without warning. He flicked the ash off his cigarette and stood, the smoke curling around him as he stepped outside the booth without a word. His eyes scanned her from head to toe, taking in every detail from the worn soles of her boots to the tension she was trying to hide in her jaw papers, he said, and she handed them over with hands steady but too clean. She realized, too late, they looked like hands that had not worked or fought or bled. Even though she had done all 3 many times, the guard raised an eyebrow. and tilted the ID card under the sunlight, watching it shimmer correctly. But still he hesitated, and then he did something she had not anticipated. He smiled. It was not the smile of someone amused. It was a smile of recognition, not full, not certain, but enough to light a flicker of memory in his face. And she saw it, and knew that he had seen something in her before, not here, not now, but somewhere else. Maybe in a photo, maybe in a file, maybe in a room full of screens where people like him watched. People like her without their masks. "You look familiar," he said slowly. Voice calm, like a man remembering a dream, and she laughed gently, forced light, curling the edges of fear into something that sounded like tiredness. "People say that a lot, I have. One of those faces," she said, and he nodded, but he did not believe her. Not entirely. He handed back her papers and stepped closer, so close she could see the crack in his front tooth and the scar behind his ear. A clean line that told her he had once worn a wire, once listened, once spoken words that could kill from a distance. He said something then too soft for her to catch, and she leaned in slightly, and that was when he whispered it into her ear. Just 3 words that shattered the space between. Them 3 words no stranger should. "No," your brother screamed. She jerked back before she could stop herself. And his smile widened. Not cruel, not kind, just full of certainty now, and he stepped aside, lifting the gate. Slowly, as if giving her permission to run if she wanted to, as if daring. She did not run. She walked through the gate. Head-high pulse screaming in her ears, back straight as steel, knowing that to falter now would undo everything on the other side. The road narrowed into gravel, bordered by brush and broken fence posts, and she walked fast, but not too fast, replaying the words. Again and again your brother screamed, not a guess, not a bluff, but a fact, and the only way he could have known was if he had been there, if he had heard it himself, which meant he was more than just a guard. He was a witness, a link maybe, even the one who pressed the button or watched it happen through a glass wall. She reached the bend in the road and ducked behind a fallen tree. Out of sight, heart-racing hand pressed over her, mouth trying to keep her breath inside her body, trying to keep from falling apart, because now it was real. More real than it had ever been. The mission was not just a task, it was vengeance, it was family, it was truth, and she would see it through. Even if it broke her, night was starting to creep over the land. Shadows growing long and dangerous, and she knew the second checkpoint would be harder, tighter, more alert. She had only hours to reach the next safe. Marker a derelict water tower near the abandoned quarry, and from there she could catch the train line hidden beneath. The old tunnel system forgotten by the public, but still very much alive for those who knew how to see. She moved quickly through the brush, eyes scanning for drones, ears alert for dogs or voices, every snap twig a threat, every gust of wind a messenger she had passed. The line now, there was no going back, and the only path was forward, straight into the mouth of a system that had already swallowed better people than her an hour. Later, the tower rose out of the ground like a black tooth. Against the dark sky, rusted and hollow inside, filled with graffiti and old rain, she climbed. The ladder carefully, each rung a scream in the silence, and at the top she found what she needed, a satchel tucked behind a panel, containing a new set of clothes, a burner phone, and a data chip smaller than her fingernail with instructions that made her stomach turn. It was worse than she thought. The facility was not just storage, it was conversion. The documents revealed live experiments, names, dates, photos, and one photo in particular made her knees go weak. It was her brother, but not as she remembered him. This version was gaunt, eyes empty, hair-shaved, surgical scars along his skull. He was strapped to a chair, wires trailing from his spine, labeled Subject K9, last seen 17 months ago, presumed terminated. Presumed terminated, but not confirmed. She stared at the image until it blurred, and then she looked away because looking too long made it too hard to breathe. She tucked the chip into her coat and took one last look at the stars overhead, trying to remember how they looked before they were watched, before they became coordinates in someone else's war. And then she climbed back down into the dark, knowing that ahead lay the tunnel, and beyond that, the facility, and beyond that, answers she might not survive finding. The mouth of the tunnel yawned open, like a wound in the earth, swallowing the last of the twilight as Alina stepped inside, boots echoing softly on the ancient stone tracks that had once carried. Freight and workers and whispers now long, gone now replaced by shadows and secrets and the slow drip of water from somewhere deep in the black. She lit the low red beam on her wristband, shielded beneath her sleeve a flicker, barely strong enough to show the path ahead but enough to keep her moving, to keep her from stumbling over the bones of the past. The air grew colder with every step, a damp chill that clung to her skin and seemed to seep through her coat into her lungs. The silence here was not empty, it was thick, full of breathless waiting. And when she passed the old utility cart, overturned and rusted, she noticed the scorch marks along the side, 3 precise holes burned through the steel. Like surgical wounds, she crouched, touched the edge of one still smooth despite the years, and realized it had not been a collapse that sealed this tunnel. It had been a purge. She kept moving deeper now, counting her steps, eyes scanning the walls for the symbols, the old ones, the resistance, used during the blackout years, scratched in chalk or carved in stone or left in coded graffiti that told you where to go, where not to step, where death had waited and sometimes still did. She found the first one near the junction, a small spiral looped twice. It meant the safe house was close, just 100 meters down and to the left. But it also meant something else. It meant someone had been here recently, someone alive. She drew her blade silently, a slim black edge of tempered steel shaped to look like a tool, but deadly in the right hands, and hers were steady despite the tremor crawling up her spine. She stepped into the left tunnel slower now, her breaths counted and shallow, her ears straining for sound. The red beam swept across the walls and then landed on it, the safe house door, a slab of steel, painted to look like concrete, bolted into the wall with a keypad worn smooth by time. She entered the code, slowly, 1 digit at a time, 749138, the numbers her brother used to carve into the side of his bunk when they were children, pretending they were agents even before they knew such people existed. The door clicked once and opened inward just enough to let her slip through before sealing shut again behind her. Inside, the room was small, barely wider than a coffin, and twice as tall, lit by a dying bulb swinging from a cord above a desk, covered in scattered files, and beneath it a cot. And beside that, a terminal, still warm, still glowing. Someone had been here, someone maybe still. While she froze, listened, heart tight in her chest. No footsteps, no breath, just the soft hum of the terminal, and the steady flicker of the bulb as it threatened to burn out. She stepped toward the desk, every instinct telling her to run, but the mission pulling her forward. She scanned the files, maps, facility blueprints, medical reports, lists of names, subjects, procedures, phrases underlined in red, neural bridge, cross-link dissociation, failure, subject, reboot, and then her hand stopped on a photo curled at the corners, black and white stained in one edge, and in the center, her brother again. But this time he was standing, not strapped, not sedated, standing in a corridor wearing a uniform, eyes blank like a doll, staring directly at the camera but not seeing it, not seeing anything. And beside him, a man, half in shadow, tall, broad shoulders, hands clasped behind his back, and she knew instantly. She had seen him before, not in person, not yet, but in dreams, in fragments, in the whispers. The old fighters told each other late at night, the man with the glass hand, they called him a myth, a ghost, a surgeon without a face, known only by what he left behind, bodies that walked without souls, minds wiped clean, rewritten, loyal to no flag, only to him. The terminal beeped, and her head snapped toward it. The screen shifted, flashing symbols, then a message line by line. Entering command mode, establishing relay. Wait, she backed toward the cot, grabbed the blade tighter, and then the screen changed again, a face appearing in black and white, grainy but unmistakable, the guard from the checkpoint, smiling, that same thin smile, now even more certain, more dangerous. Hello, Mila, or should I say Alina, huh? Said she did not respond. You made it further than most, that alone is impressive. But you are not the first to come through this tunnel, not the first to think you could end it with a knife in a dream? And a lie. She stepped closer, eyes narrowing. He leaned toward the screen as if he could see her fully, and maybe there were cameras behind the wall, behind her own eyes. For all she knew, you want answers, you deserve them, and you will get them when you reach the facility. I have arranged your entry. I am no longer your enemy. She laughed once, bitter and sharp, and he tilted his head like a curious animal. We were never enemies. Alina, we were always the same. You just forgot your training. The screen went black. She stood in the silence of the room, feeling the weight of those last words crash. Over her forgotten training? No, it was impossible. She would remember. She would know they couldn't have wiped her, not like the others. She would feel it, wouldn't she? But then her fingers began to itch, and she looked down and saw the faintest scar along her wrist, one she had never noticed. Before one shaped like a looped spiral, she left the safe house behind her and entered the last stretch of tunnel. Now deeper than ever now, lit only by the sick blue glow of fungus that grew between the cracks, and somewhere ahead where the path split into three she would have to choose, and only one led to the facility. The others led to death, but something else waited in the dark. Something more than machines, more than guards. Something she had known once before they made. Her forget something calling her by name, and as her footsteps echoed onward, she realized it was not the mission that was about to change. Everything, it was her. She moved through the tunnel without looking back, without breathing too hard, without letting her thoughts spiral into the abyss that now scraped. At the edges of her mind, the walls grew tighter, the floor uneven, the roof dipping so low she had to crouch and crawl, and the air began to taste different. Not just damp, but sterilized, laced with something metallic, something that made her mouth go dry and her eyes sting, as if the very breath of this place was not meant for lungs like hers. Her hands found the edge of a service grate just as the last of the path ended, and she knelt beside it, running fingers over the bolts that should have been sealed shut, but were loose, as if someone had already come through someone with a key, or a purpose, or both. She lifted it slowly, and the scent that rose to meet her was not rot or rust, but ozone and polish and silence. She dropped into the shaft below and landed hard in darkness, surrounded by concrete and cables. A service tunnel wide enough for two men to walk shoulder to shoulder, and high enough for drones to hover unseen. She stayed low and moved fast, her blade still in hand, though now it felt like a toothpick against whatever forces controlled this place. She passed junctions and security panels and blinking lights that tracked movement, but did not sound alarms, which meant either she was expected or already forgotten. The corridor widened ahead into a maintenance bay, clean and empty, with stainless steel walls and a glass window that looked into a lab filled with machines that pulsed with light and wires and liquid tanks, where shapes floated, suspended, unmoving, unbreathing, but alive in a way she could not name. Her stomach turned, and she pressed herself against the wall, watching as two figures in white coats passed through. The lab speaking in hushed tones, one of them gesturing toward a screen that showed her face, not as she looked now, but as she looked then years ago, before the mission, before the mountains, before the scar. They knew she was here. They had always known. This was never infiltration. This was an invitation. She slid past the window and through a side door into a stairwell, cold and humming with electricity. Red lights lined the steps leading down, down, always down, and she followed them because there was nothing left to climb back to, no one waiting, no voice calling her back, and at the bottom, the door opened with a soft hiss. The hallway that greeted her was not like the others. It was not industrial or stark. It was warm, lit by amber lights, with walls painted in soft gray, and the air smelled of lavender and something else, something sweet and artificial, like memory processed and bottled and sprayed. She walked slowly here, her steps uncertain, not because she feared an ambush, but because everything in this place felt like a dream she once had when she was small and safe and someone else. She passed rooms that looked like bedrooms, each with a number on the door and a camera above it, silent eyes watching empty beds. Some made some. Not some with the sheets folded perfectly, some with stains in the corners like someone had been taken quickly, or not at all. Then she reached the end of the hall, and the last door opened without her touching it, and inside was a room that should not have existed, but did, a room that looked exactly like her childhood bedroom, down to the torn poster on the wall, the cracked night lamp, the old wool blanket her grandmother made, the one with the bird stitched in the corner, and sitting in the Chair by the desk with his back to her was the man with the glass hand. She knew it was him without seeing his face. The light caught the reflection of his artificial fingers, shaped like bone and metal, fused so perfectly they moved like flesh. Did not turn when she entered. Only spoke in a voice that did not match his frame. A voice too young, too smooth, too familiar. You came further than any of them. She did not answer. Do you know why this room is here? He asked, still not facing her. Because you made it, she said. No, he replied. Because you remembered? He stood then slowly, tall and precise, and turned to face her, and her knees nearly buckled. Because the face was wrong and right, at the same time. It was her brother, but older, colder. Perfect, like a mask of who he once was. The same jawline, same eyes, but something behind them had been scraped away and replaced with mirrors. You died, she said. Or they told me you did. I did, he said, and I lived. She took a step back, and he raised a hand. Not in warning, but in plea. They used me as they will use you unless you do what I did, unless you become what I became. She shook her head. No, too hard, too fast, too late. And the walls began to hum and shift, and the room fell away, revealing screens on every side, displaying faces, files, footage of her, her training, her surgeries, her programming lines of code with her name at the top. You were not recruited, Alina. You were built. She fell to her knees, unable to hold the weight of that sentence. They wiped you more than once. Every memory you cherish is a reconstruction. Every instinct you have was shaped and sharpened and placed in you like a weapon in a sheath. She tried to speak, but her voice would not come, only air and disbelief and rage. But you can still choose, he said. You can walk back out and forget again, or you can finish this and tear it down. She looked at him, looked at the face that once taught her to ride a bike and now stood before her like a ghost carved from glass and sorrow, and he stepped closer and handed her something small and black, a trigger simple and smooth with one button in the center, one push, and the system fails, everything releases, everyone wakes up or dies. He looked at her with eyes that no longer blinked and said, "You decide, little sister." And as the lights dimmed and alarms began to whisper through the floor, she knew the facility knew she was here. And the choice was now. She stared at the trigger resting in her palm, so small it felt like nothing more than a toy, something a child would find in a box of broken memories, yet the weight of it pulled at her bones like an anchor, as if the decision ahead had already carved itself into the future. Her thumb hovered over the button as the low hum in the walls grew louder, alarms rising slowly, like a tide creeping closer like the moment before lightning touches ground. Her brother, or the man who wore his face, watched her in silence. No breath, no twitch, no flicker of emotion, and she realized that whatever part of him had once laughed with her under the orchard trees was gone, buried under layers of rewiring and control and loss, and whatever remained was only here for this moment, for this question, for this choice. If she pressed the button, she would destroy the neural relay system, collapse the hive that connected the subjects, shut down, the surveillance grid crash, the backups. But also there was a chance the pulse would kill every mind connected to the stream, not just the controlled, but the unwilling, the sleeping, the innocent. And if she walked away, it would continue the experiments, the rewrites, the erasure of truth and soul and will. The facility began to shift beneath her feet, lights dimming walls, vibrating with power, rerouted. Security systems cycling between lockdown and override, and the voice that came over the speaker was not mechanical. It was soft, female, almost kind, like a whisper in the ear from someone you loved and feared at the same time. You are not meant to choose, the voice said. But she already had. She turned and ran, not back the way she came, but deeper into the core through the corridor. Her brother opened for her past sealed doors, now split open by the override. his fingers brushing the walls as he walked beside her without speaking, without blinking, until they reached the reactor, the heart of the system pulsing behind glass and fiber cables like veins running through metal and silence. There was no one there, no guards, no techs, only the machines, watching blinking sensing, and at the center a panel waiting for confirmation. Waiting for her? He looked at her one last time, and for a second, maybe just a breath, she saw something flicker in his eyes, something old, something hers. She stepped forward, pressed the trigger into the panel, and whispered his name, not the one they gave him, but the one he was before. The lights flared white, so bright they burned, and then everything stopped. Silence fell like ash, thick and endless. When she woke, she was lying in snow, not cold, not wet, just white everywhere. The facility was gone. Nothing above ground remained, just a crater where memory had lived and died. She stood slowly, muscles screaming, ribs, cracked blood on her hands, her coat torn and beneath it, a scar across her chest she had never seen before. The world was still, but something had changed. She walked for what felt like hours until she saw the tower again. The rusted water tank still standing somehow in the distance, and beneath it, 3 people, waiting. One of them was a woman she had seen once in a file marked terminated. The second was a boy, barely 16, with eyes like hers. The third was someone she would come to know much later in a room far from here. Someone who would write her name on a wall filled with the names of the lost. She joined them without a word, and together they began to walk, not toward safety, but toward purpose. The war was not over. The story was not done, but the system had fallen, and she had survived the unimaginable. Now, the world would have to face what she had become.